Hi class, welcome to Refrigeration and Air Conditioning lecture number 2 on food preservation. Let's start with defining what is food preservation. It generally refers to the technologies that are used to prevent food spoilage so as to extend the shelf life of food. And by that I mean improving or maintaining the quality and nutritional value and preventing or slowing down the microbial growth, enzymic enzymatic activity, and chemical reactions. So those are the main ways food gets spoiled. So preventing the spoilage and then maintaining quality and nutritional value. Now, what exactly is food spoilage? Food spoilage generally refers to a change in quality of food, um, primarily. So it is a process by which food deteriorates to a point where um, it's not fit for human consumption due to quality concerns and also due to safety concerns. So, what does quality mean? Quality basically means food's appearance, texture, smell, taste, things that make us feel like the food is appetizing. Okay, things that makes you feel like eating food. So those are the quality of the food, and the nutrition value of the food basically means um, how much a food contributes to your daily intake of essential nutrients. For example, macronutrients like carbohydrates, fats, proteins, micronutrients like vitamins, minerals, and other beneficial components like antioxidants, dietary fiber, etc. Now, some spoiled food may be safe to eat because there are no microbes or pathogens or toxins present. Okay, but sometimes food that doesn't have any quality issues, it looks good, it tastes good, it smells good, but they may be unsafe to eat. Okay, so spoiled and unsafe food uh, refers to together refers to food spoilage. And food preservation is basically to make sure that either of these things don't happen and food can be consumed for a longer period of time. Food can be stored and consumed for a longer period of time. Now, what are the main ways in which the food spoils? Okay, there are five different main methods or main paths through which food spoiled described in the slide. Um, you all know about, or you're mostly aware about microbial growth in food. Um, and it's mainly microbes like bacteria, yeast, and mold. Okay, you can see here that virus doesn't really spoil food where it can change the texture, taste, or the color, things like that. Virus cannot really spoil food, but other microbes can. They can cause food decay and foodborne illnesses by breaking down food components and produce toxins. Then there are other chemical reactions that can happen in food due to enzymes. These are called enzymatic reactions. They can also lead to spoilage by altering color, taste, and texture. Example is browning that you see in bananas. Okay, that's due to an enzyme called PPO, polyphenol. Um, then the other way in which foods can get spoiled is exposure to oxygen. And this is especially true if you have fats in your food. Um, Exposure to oxygen can also spoil other things like your wine that is stored in wine coolers. So you can see that a lot of times wines are tightly stored using cork, but once it's open, it's consumed quickly. It's not restored because of the problem with oxidation. Once it's exposed to oxidation, it degrades and the taste and the quality of the wine goes down. The other thing that can accelerate spoilage is moisture. Again, this is primarily affecting the quality, like the texture, so sogginess, stickiness, or lumping, and it's primarily affecting uh, fruits and vegetables. Radiation spoilage, UV light can cause some chemical reaction within the food. For example, lipid oxidation, protein denaturation, and nutrient degradation. It can also lead to fat rancidity, the way in which fat um, oxidizes. It can also lead to color fading and loss of vitamins. And it can also, in cases of wine, it can also degrade the quality of wine really quickly. So that's why a lot of wine coolers have UV blockers on their glass window. All right, so now let's look at some of the common food preservation methods and which one of these would be would fall under refrigeration. So there are several methods, and the six primary methods are shown in this slide. A lot of times, a combination of these methods are used together in items that needs longer shelf life. So let's start with temperature-based method. So there are three temperature-based methods for high temperature. So first one is pasteurization, and you have heard pasteurized milk, yogurt, things like that, where heating to very high temperature destroys all microbes. Okay, so you're basically sterilizing. Um, and there are temperatures slightly below 100 degrees C where there are other processes called blanching where it's it's done for a much shorter time, uh, and it's used for rapid cooling afterwards. And it basically kills microbes and also inactivates enzymes. So high temperature um, solutions are basically for preventing microbes and enzymatic activity. Okay, so they prevent these. So now, if you look at the low temperature solutions, this is mainly to slow the microbial activity and slow. So you slows down microbial growth. Okay, it doesn't kill them or destroy them or eliminate them. It just slows it down. They're still present. Okay. You might have also seen um, packages, for example, your chips and other items, dried items, and all packed in um, either in a pressurized packaging with nitrogen or carbon dioxide, or in vacuum packaging where some of the dried fruits or items are fully vacuumed and um, put in packaging. So what they're doing is reducing oxidation. Okay, so removing oxidation. It also means that it stops microbial activity and enzymal activity to a certain extent because there's no oxygen. Because both of these things will be more if there is oxygen present. Okay, so once you open such packaging, now they're perishable. The other option is removing moisture. In this case, is dehydration. So removing moisture stops moisture-related spoilage mechanisms. So it is either drying by putting the food item in the sun or mechanical drying using controlled heating. And sometimes it's drying done at a really cold temperature where the temperatures could be as low as minus 34 to minus 45 and you fully remove the water. In this case, it's changing water from ice to water vapor. Okay, so it's called sublimation. Okay, because it's done at such a low temperature. All of these create really dry food without any moisture, which can be stored for a much longer time because it stops microbial and enzymal activity. Okay. The fifth method, the chemical preservation, uses preservatives that stops um, a lot of chemical reactions that could be happening within the food. They also, a lot of them basically deactivates the microbes and enzymes. So it stops microbes, stops enzymatic activities, and there's no oxygen present because it's full of preservatives in there. So no oxidation. And the common ways to do that is using benzoates, sulfites, nitrites, sorbates, etc., especially in meat, for preserving meat, and for pickling and fermentation. Some of these are known carcinogens. There's a risk of cancer if you consume foods with a lot of nitrites, for example. So there are some downsides to chemical preservation. Okay. And the last option is food irradiation. So while the food is being packaged, they use high power X-rays and gamma rays to kill off all the microbes. Um, this doesn't necessarily stop all the enzymatic activities. Okay. Now, if you look at all these methods, the methods that matter for refrigeration in terms of food preservation are the low temperature methods and also the dehydration and drying, especially when it's related to freeze drying. Okay, so these are the two methods that are relatable for us. You could also argue that blanching is the first step before freezing. Okay, but primarily it's low temperature freezing and also refrigeration temperatures, and then freeze drying. So those are the ways you slow down the microbial growth, okay, and the enzymatic activity. Now, what are the factors that affect microbial spoilage? So consider you have the food, you also have the surroundings of the food. So the temperature of the food, the moisture inside the food, the chemical composition of what type of food that is, and how much microbes were present in the beginning of the food, and also the pH level of the liquids in the food, all affect how well a microbe can grow inside it. Okay, so if a microbe gets in here, all of these factors affect how well it will grow. Okay, um, and the surrounding environment, what matters is again temperature, humidity. Humidity means how much moisture is in the air, and also how much oxygen is available, and the airflow. So higher the humidity, higher the oxygen, higher the temperature, lower the airflow, it's a really bad situation for food spoilage, and it will create bad spoilage due to abundance of microbes. Okay. The common microbes, like we discussed before, are bacteria, mold, and yeast. You could also say there are some parasites and protozoas, but the primary ones are these three um, that cause food spoilage. Viruses do not cause spoilage, but can contaminate the food and cause foodborne illnesses. Examples are norovirus, rotavirus, hepatitis A, etc. There are several bacteria that also do not cause food spoilage, but it can contaminate the food, okay, and cause foodborne illnesses. So Salmonella and E. coli are very famous. Listeria is also very famous because a lot of times you hear them in the news that, okay, because of this contamination, they have to recall a lot of products from the shelf in these stores. Okay, so these are pretty, uh, if you follow news, you'll very commonly hear these three things. creating a lot of food recalls. Uh, of all these microorganisms, bacteria and mold can produce toxins that can cause foodborne illnesses. Okay, so this is actually spoiling the food, not just contaminating the food. Okay, yeast, so toxins are chemicals that are bad for you. Okay, toxic for you. Okay, so even if you remove the bacteria and mold and you didn't remove the toxins, you can get sick and create foodborne illnesses. Yeast does not produce toxins, but it can spoil the food by affecting its quality. Okay, so yeast is generally used in cooking um, because it doesn't create any toxins. It affects the quality and creates a better texture if used appropriately, but it can also create a poorer texture um, if the food is stored for a longer time or under bad conditions. So when you consume a food and you get sick, there are two reasons you get sick. One is you had microbes that was in the food and now they are attacking your body, your immune system. Okay. The other way you get sick is they had toxins or chemicals that are bad for your body in that food that is now affecting your digestive system and your other systems within your body. Okay, so those two things, those are the two ways in which you get foodborne sickness. All right. So now let's look at microbial growth versus temperature. How temperature affects the growth of microbe. If you look at the chart on the right, you can see several different categories of microbes based on their response to temperature. And each of them, it seems like their growth curve looks like a bell curve, or it looks like the shape of an inverted bell. So there is an accelerated growth rate, and there is an optimal growth rate, and after which, as the temperature increases, it's almost like a death rate, and beyond a certain max temperature, there is no further growth of that microbe. Okay, and this is very similar for all categories of these microbes for a range of temperatures from roughly around minus 20 degrees C to roughly close to 110 degrees C. So this is the range in which most of the microbes uh, are present. And if you look at within that range, a subset of those microbes are responsible for food spoilage. Not all of them are responsible for food spoilage, but it's it's a small subset. And these are primarily under two categories, the psychrotrophs and mesophiles. Okay, so they typically range from, you know, the temperature you'll see in a refrigerator to the temperature outside in your room. Okay, so 0 to 45 degrees C is the ideal range for growth of these food spoilage microbes. And what are the categories? So typically bacteria and mold and yeast are the microbes that will cause food spoilage. Viruses, on the other hand, are pathogenic. They can create foodborne illnesses, but they don't spoil food. Okay, um, so the one that you will mostly see inside a refrigerator uh, are the psychrotrophs. Okay, primarily bacteria and mold. Okay, and some of them are pathogenic. All right. Now let's go back to what we looked at in the first lecture. If you remember, a typical refrigerator freezer in your house has two regions, and the range of temperatures in a good refrigerator will be from 1 degree C to 4.5 or close to 4 degrees C, and the freezer is close from minus 18 to minus 23 degrees C. And The reason for that is primarily due to the temperature relationship of the microbial growth or microbial activity. You can almost synonymously use the growth versus microbial activity. Okay, if it's able to reproduce and grow a lot, that means microbial activity is high. So if you're below 4.5 degrees C, um, then your chances are less. You're relatively low in terms of growth rate of microbes, but they're still there. But if you're past minus 18 degrees C, there's almost little to no microbial growth in that region. Okay, that doesn't mean they are dead. That means they're inactive. Okay, if at a higher temperature region, they're usually not only inactive, they are actually neutralized. They're completely dead. But when you go to colder temperatures, um, they're usually inactive, and when it warms up, they can start reproducing again. So there's that particular thing that you need to consider there. All right. So now let's look at the guidelines from FDA. FDA is the Food and Drug Administration, a federal agency in the Department of Human Health and Human Services in USA. And their guidelines are typically used not only in USA but throughout the world. So according to those guidelines, the danger zone for food storage is 4 to 60 degrees C. Okay, above 60 degrees C, microbials start. So greater than 60 degrees C, microbes start getting neutralized, getting killed. Okay, but ideally you want to go higher than that. But typically, if you spend enough time above 60 degrees C, you can neutralize the microbe and they don't grow in that condition. If it is less than 4 degrees C, its microbial activity is really slow, or growth is really slow. So if your food is left in this condition between 4 to 60 degrees C, there's a good chance of spoilage and all kinds of foodborne diseases happening if you leave it outside for long enough time. Okay. Now, what is the outside typical room temperature? So that is roughly around 25 to 30 degrees C, right? So room temperature is some of the most ideal condition for uh, growth. If you look here, the room conditions here is really ideal for growth of microbes. And freezer temperature should be minus 18 degrees C or below, according to FDA. Now there is a 2-hour rule for leaving items that should be refrigerated um, at room temperature. So if you're leaving the items within this range, and I'm talking about perishable items, items like milk, meat, you know, um, things like that are very perishable and very prone to microbial growth, you should leave them in room temperature for not more than 2 hours. Okay. Uh, so 1 hour if the room temperature is above 32 degrees C. If it is really warm in the room, you should stick to 1 hour rule. Okay. And by that time, so if you shop meat from the restaurant, from the grocery store, if you buy milk from the grocery store, you shouldn't leave that in your car for a long time. Okay, you buy the items, get home, put it in the refrigerator within the 2-hour rule. After the 2-hour rule, uh, the microbes grow exponentially. Okay, so if you follow the 2-hour rule and you reached your refrigerator on time and then you put it in the freezer at minus 18 degrees C, your food will remain safe indefinitely. Okay, so you can store it for a long time, but there's no safety issue, but the quality will go low. Okay, its texture, taste, and all that. Um, those things will get affected. Okay, so that's what this line is. The tenderness, flavor, aroma, juiciness, and color will decrease the longer the food is in the freezer. Freezing does not affect the nutrient contents. Okay, so let's say you have power outages and your power in the house went out, and regardless of how long the outage was, if the freezer temperature was below the 4.5 degrees C, then it's okay for the food to be refrozen. Okay. If it is went above 4.5 degrees C, you should try to consume the food quickly or get rid of it. Okay. You shouldn't refreeze it and store it for later use. Refrigerated food is safe provided the power outage was less than 4 hours and your door was kept shut. Okay. So if your refrigerator was without power and you didn't open the door for 4 hours, then the food is still okay. But in general, the food stored in the refrigerator you're planning to consume in 3 to 5 days, right? So if you're in freezer, it's almost indefinitely, okay? So if you're talking about meat, it's usually consumed in 3 to 5 days. Eggs, 3 to 5 weeks, um, and other leftover food, 3 to 4 days. So the 4 degrees C in here, you can see a lot of fruits and vegetables, things like that. You're planning to consume within days. Things that are stored here, you can store them for years, okay, as long as you're not opening them frequently or causing that temperature to go above minus 18 degrees C frequently. Okay. Now this begs a good question. Um, so due to power outages or other usage conditions, for example, if the freezer and refrigerator temperature reached unsafe levels, um, should it be okay if you just cook the food? Because if you cook the food, you're killing all the microbes, right? If you cook the food, you're way above 110 degrees C. Um, so if you cook the food, shouldn't it be okay regardless of whether there are microbes or not? The problem with that is when uh, the food is in unsafe temperature zones, uh, there will be toxins that are created by these microbes. Okay, and a lot of these toxins are heat stable. So even if the microbe is dead, these toxins can create foodborne illnesses, and some of them are dangerous. So if you have meat that you take out from the freezer and cut half a portion of it and then put it back and then take it out, warm it, cut half a portion, put it back, you cannot keep doing that forever because it'll create toxins in the food, um, which may not be killed by cooking because they're heat stable toxins, even if you kill the microbes. All right. Okay. So that is about the effect of temperature. Now, how does another environmental factor affect the food preservation? The second factor is the humidity or the relative humidity or the moisture content in the environment. Typically, if the humidity is less than 60%, it's in general considered safe. Um, it's considered even less than 60%, you can have bacterial growth or mold growth or yeast growth, but in general, it's considered a good threshold below which most of the microbes don't grow. Okay, but if it is above this range and also the temperature is kind of at the boundary, then you have a good chance of bacteria, mold, and yeast growing. Okay, a lot of times you might see mold on the gasket of the refrigerator. Okay, so close to the gasket of the refrigerator, uh, you might have high humidity condition because of the air leaking in. So that's a high humid area, and if you have enough air leaking and the room is humid, you could have a good conducive space for mold formation, especially if you're not cleaning the gasket regularly. So some older refrigerators, if you look close to the gaskets, you will see residue of mold present there. Now, the third factor is the enzymatic spoilage of food. So what does this mean? It means it's not due to microbes, it's due to the chemicals that are present within the food. And these are basically enzymes. And one of the most common one that creates spoilage of fruits is the polyphenol oxidase. Okay, if you remember how your bananas change color, in the beginning they're green and then they slowly ripen, become yellow, and once they're yellow, they turn brown. And this turning brown is due to this particular uh, enzyme. However, this is uh, this kind of spoilage only affects the quality. Okay, it doesn't affect safety. It's the food is still safe to consume. You can still eat this banana. It won't make you sick. Okay, you can still eat this apple. It just changes the taste, texture, and color, and a little bit of the nutritional value itself. But it's not gonna make you um, sick. So similarly, in meat, you could have lipase enzymes um, breaking down the fat, oxidize the fat. Okay, and then there are also some other enzymes that break down the fruits and vegetables, which leads to softening and spoilage. All of these are mainly affecting the quality, taste, texture, and things like that. All of these foods, due to these kind of processes, are typically okay to consume. All of these are also affected by temperature, relative humidity, oxygen, and airflow, okay, of the surroundings. And of the food itself, the chemical composition of the food, that determines what type of enzyme is present. The temperature and the pH level also matters. All right. Now let's compare the uh, spoilage of due to enzymatic processes versus temperature. So above, if you think about the microbes, above 110 degrees C, all the microbes are killed or neutralized. Above 70 degrees C, most of the enzymes that cause the enzymatic um, spoilage are denatured. Okay, so they are also broken down, and now they don't have the enzymatic activity. So high temperature processing or high temperature food processing, if you remember, um, a few slides back, here, and so any of these processes here, pasteurization, sterilization, blanching, all of these high temperature processes will kill the or denature the enzymes. Okay, so when you're doing canning, uh, when you find, if you look at canned food, there's no way there will be enzymatic spoilage in canned food because of the high temperatures that are involved in the canning process. Okay, 0 to 5 degrees C, which is the temperature inside the refrigerator, it's really slow. Below minus 18 degrees C, completely stopped. So it's almost similar to how the microbes are affected. Okay, so almost very similar to the same temperatures in which microbial activity is affected. Now, all of those that we discussed so far are microbial and enzymatic food spoilage. Now, if you consider low temperatures, there are other ways that foods can spoil inside a refrigerator and freezer. And these are the common methods. If you look at fruits and vegetables and you store them in refrigerator, you know that after a few days or a few weeks, their quality changes. One of the main problems with the refrigerator is it removes the water from whatever items that are stored in the fridge. Okay, the evaporator in the fridge is a dehumidifier, so it pulls moisture out from all the items that are exposed to the dry air in the fridge. So if you leave the fruits and vegetables open to the air in the fridge, they will slowly lose water and can wilt and become less tasty, more stiff, uh, and not very appealing to eat. The other issue is freezer burn, and this one is primarily for items that are stored in the freezer, like items like ice creams and meat. That's where it's commonly that people commonly what people notice. Also, if frozen fruits and vegetables are stored in the freezer, they can also have the same effect. So we'll get to that in a little bit. It's typically um, they'll get a dark color and their texture changes. It's kind of not so easy to chew, easy to eat afterwards. The third problem uh, that is found during frozen storage is ice crystal formation, and it's a typical problem that happens on fruits and vegetables, anything that has some moisture that is stored in the fridge um, and become mushy and lose their original texture. This is a big problem if the rate of freezing of the items you're storing is is not fast enough. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit. Another problem is the order transfer. Okay, so sometimes if you have really odorous items that are in the fridge, that smell can transfer into other items. Okay, sometimes ice creams might taste like garlic or some other odor. Taste like the fish taste might go into the ice cream or bread. Um, so if you have kimchi in your fridge, that smell and taste can be absorbed by other foods. So odor absorption by uh, items stored within the food is another way that uh, affects um, the quality of food. And the last one is something that happens both inside the fridge and outside. Is ethylene gas from fruits accelerates fruit ripening and also the spoilage of vegetables. So ethylene gas is sometimes produced by fruits like apple, banana, etc. And if you store a bunch of banana together, they will ripen faster as opposed to if you separate them, for example. So if you have a lot of ethylene gas in a confined space, it'll trigger the hormones within um, the fruits to create more ethylene gas and also create the accelerate the ripening process of the fruits. All right, so let's go through each of the items that were discussed. The dehumidification that occurs naturally in the refrigerator affects the fruits and vegetables. It's basically the moisture loss. If you remember how your fridge is arranged, you will see that some of these bins where you store your fruits and vegetables are closed, and they try to. Some of them have really airtight containers too. Some of them will have a knob here that you can slide left and right. Okay, this is an example of that knob. So that knob controls the opening and how much air that can go into the bin. By controlling that opening, you can control how much moisture gets into this area. You do want to store it in 80 to 95% humidity condition, okay, um, so that you don't lose too much water from the fruits and vegetables. But the risk with that is uh, the chance of mold growth. Okay, so uh, you have to control the temperature, airflow, everything in such a way that there is no risk of mold growth. Plus, from time to time, you will have to clean this area because it's controlled into a high humidity region. Anyways, that at least makes the texture of the fruits and vegetables um, consistent and not deteriorate too much after weeks of storage. So this is the freezer burn issue. So you can see the color of the meat changes a little bit. So it's a process that happens when it's exposed to cold, dry air, and it creates dehydration and increases oxidative reactions. It changes the texture and the flavor. Okay, now it's harder to chew when you cook such meat. It's still safe. Okay, it does not make the food unsafe. So sometimes if you store the food for years, um, it will be just because of the quality reasons you might have to throw it away, but it may be still safe to eat. And most of the freezer burnt uh, food will you will notice ice crystals. Okay, so if you notice ice crystals, the ice is coming from the water that was inside these stored items. Okay, so you have pulled out all the moisture um, from inside the stored items, and now that moisture is in the top. In addition to that, there is a lot of oxidation reactions happening inside because airflow is hitting the surface. So to prevent this, no direct contact with airflow is what should be done. So you store them in airtight containers. Sometimes you can get freezer bags that you wrap these items in and seal them and then store it in. Then you can significantly reduce this issue. So ice crystals, the other problem. So when everybody knows that when water is cooled below 0 degrees C, it becomes ice. But it just doesn't become one single crystal. What happens is there are multiple places that the ice starts to form within water, and multiple different crystal sizes form when you freeze ice. If the ice crystals are large, okay, and you freeze big chunks of meat, for example, so if you have ice crystals that are this big that form, so you're basically freezing a lot of cells together, okay? And when you thaw them and they become water, they've been through so much stress in freezing and thawing, it'll destroy the tissue, okay? Especially when the crystals are so big. So this is an example of uh, tissue damage in meat after freezing and thawing in a typical freezer. If you freeze really fast, the ice crystals that form are really small, comparable to the size of the cell walls or comparable to the small cells within the meat, okay? And when they form and then you melt them, they don't damage the cell walls, okay? They they remain almost intact if the rate of freezing is fast enough. Typically, there are blast freezers that are used for preparing frozen food and meat. So when you buy, for example, meat that is frozen and it's shipped from overseas, before packaging, if they have done the blast freezing correctly, the texture of that meat would or fish would be very similar to a fresh fish. But if it is not done correctly, the moment you thaw it and you put it in a little bit of water and thaw it, you will see that the meat will disintegrate because the cell walls have been damaged. Okay, so this is another way you can damage food inside a freezer. The deodorization is to solve the odor issue that I was telling you about. A lot of the refrigerator manufacturers now have odor purifiers primarily using activated carbons and photocatalytic filters that stop the odors from propagating inside the compartment, and that helps stopping the odor transfer from one food item to the other. Okay. There are also solutions that are available for stopping the ethylene gas. Okay, and it's especially manufactured in US. So you can see some of the advertisements here. So there are technology that uses photocatalytic filters that convert ethylene to uh, carbon dioxide, oxidizes ethylene basically. Um, there are also some passive filters like permanganate powder that are placed in sachets that also reacts with ethylene. So both of these, um, you'll be surprised if you use, for example, the permanganate filters. Normally, if your fruits and vegetables don't, let's say they stay fresh for 1 week, you can probably increase that time frame to 2 to 3 to 4 weeks in your fridge with a simple device like this. Okay, and the culprit here is ethylene. All right, so that concludes this lecture on food preservation. Thank you.